Tatjana Schnell, welcome to Bendiksen Airways.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I can do that. Yeah, I'm Tatjana. I am German. I grew up in the middle of Germany, studied quite widely and wildly theology, philosophy, psychology mainly, psychology of religion, African studies. Yeah, I always had a quite broad interest in what this life is about. And then I studied and continue those studies in the work I'm doing as a researcher, first in Germany, then in Austria, and since 2020, I'm a professor at MF, a vitenskapelig høyskole in Oslo, where I have the professorship of existential psychology.
What is existential psychology?
Well, it is not very clear what it is. There aren't any other professorships in that field. There is existential philosophy, of course. We know philosophers from Kierkegaard via Sartre, Heidegger, Jaspers, Arendt, de Beauvoir, and so on. Then there have been several people also already during the beginning of the 20th century who took that often European thought to America, and they developed an existential psychotherapy, which is still something else. And what we're doing in existential psychology is tackling existential questions, questions of meaning, of how to deal with suffering and mortality, about freedom, responsibility, from a psychological but also interdisciplinary perspective, mainly empirically. We are not interested in telling people what we think, but we're more interested in finding out what people think, experience, feel, how they experience these questions, these topics, and if they do at all, because it seems to be a bit of a taboo to talk about
Mm.
such things.
So, what inspired you to focus on existential psychology and the concept of meaning in life?
Nothing particular.
Mm.
It is just since I was a child, I was wondering what this all is about. I felt quite lost in life, and I started reading, and I love reading. I read a lot of Dostoevsky, for example, who for me is a big psychologist,
Mm.
and then got into philosophy, and it was more this need for understanding that brought me to that topic, and not personal crisis or so.
Yeah. So, how would you define meaning in life? What is the definition?
Yeah, that's the big question
Yeah.
now. I like to start by trying to define what meaning is before I go to meaning in life. So maybe we can start there.
Mm. Please.
And if we look at meaning, and there are different concepts, but the one I'm working with is also one that is known in philosophy. It is meaning is an attribution. It is something that we see in something else. We see our life or this situation or that thing is meaningful or not. That means we attribute it to it. It's a quality that is not inherent in something. But I, as a person in my specific situation right now, find, for example, talking to you meaningful. In 1 year, I might think, oh, why did I do so? But that does not devalue that experience right now. It's an experience in a certain moment. So this meaning is subjective, because someone else could say, what's that about? You're sitting there talking about things nobody understands. What's the meaning of it?
Mm.
It's subjective. It's also relational. Me in that situation with you in it, meaning comes from being in situations, in relations. And it is also dynamic. It is something that can change very much while we're living, while we're doing things. So it has these qualities, being subjective, dynamic, and relational. And if we then use that to think about what is meaning in life, it is something very similar. It is our evaluation of our life as being meaningful or not, of being more or less meaningful, which needs a kind of meta perspective. If I want to think about meaning in life, I have to step back and consider, so where am I coming from? Where do I want to go? What is going on? So it's nothing that can be felt in the moment, but it needs some more integration of past and future in the present, and the idea of What is it about, and why am I doing what I am doing?
So how would you say the state of the, what should I say, the world is now with regards to this? Are people, especially with all the new technology, distractions, etc., how are people dealing with this?
We have a lot of data on that in the meantime, which only came up in the last years, which is good to see. And for example, from my own research, I started in the beginning of the millennium, and I saw that people asked, "What a strange question! Nobody's interested in meaning." And I handed out, I did interviews, and later on, I handed out questionnaires. And there, in psychology, we work with statements, and we ask people, "How much do you agree with them?" So we don't ask, "What's the meaning in your life?" but we give them many options and ask them to agree or disagree to certain degrees. And in the beginning of the millennium, people were more or less meaningful, and hardly anyone was in a crisis of meaning. And now we see a huge difference, a huge change. And that is the same in Norway as in Germany and in
Okay.
Austria, for example, where I've been living in all countries. And there we see that the number of people who are missing meaning has gone up quite much. And the highest increase is to be seen among young people between 18 and 29 who are critically, yeah, looking at this world, asking, what are we actually doing here, and where is this going? Is it meaningful what we're doing?
Yeah.
But thereby, I must say, it is a lot. It's like about 1/4 of those young people, which still means it's not everyone. So there seem to be different ways of dealing with meaning right now, and we see that here, as in many other countries, people try to really get an idea, how can life be meaningfully lived? Or they say, well, this is all so complicated. I don't care anymore. I just live and I try to get the most out of it, me personally. And
Mm.
after me, the big flood.
Yeah. What do we know about Eastern society compared to Western?
Um, are you referring to collective and individualist
No,
societies
I'm
in that
thinking about
sense?
like geographically, India, China, societies
Yeah.
that have like Hinduism, Buddhism compared
Mm-hmm,
to.
mm-hmm. Well, there are so many different parameters we can take into account. It's not just the East and the West. Um, well, I can just start from something. One thing is what we found in our studies is that people in countries that are more affluent, more well off financially, and also with regard to education and so on, in those countries, more people have an indifferent attitude. That's that sense of, I don't have a meaning, I don't care. You
Mm.
can live without. It doesn't matter if my action doesn't matter, if I'm not being seen, or if I don't have an idea where I want to go, I just live. And that is different in all kinds of countries where it is more obvious why you do what you do. For example, because you need to do it in order to have food to live. So it's obvious why you grow something. We might say here, should I grow some strawberries on my balcony? Oh no, but which type and how do they look?
Mm.
And in other countries, is I grow something in my garden so my family has enough to eat. So
Yeah.
there's this meaning is not worthy of questioning as it is in countries where, as in our country, in Norway, and in Western countries, where we have so much possibilities and the freedom to do things or also not to do things. So that is interesting. It seems to be harder for us to
Mm.
find the meaning because it's not so obvious anymore. And that is another aspect we can see for intercultural comparisons, that in countries where um, there is a more authoritarian government and people are expected to live in a certain way, to believe the same things, to dress in a certain way, and so on. There, the four correct elements of meaning, as we define it in psychology, which is orientation, coherence, significance, and belonging, they are all met very well. People don't have to work and struggle themselves to belong somewhere, to find their own way, to be significant. They are, because they are a part of a society that wants everyone to be in there with the same orientation. In that case, it's easier to find meaning, but of course, for those who want to think by themselves, who don't want to conform. This is much more difficult, who are hoping for freedom.
You said that the ages 18 to 29, you've seen a decrease in people's experience of having meaning. Is this the same as alienation?
Crisis of meaning is quite different from alienation. You can say that during a crisis of meaning, you do feel alienated, but the way alienation is often considered in the social sciences, for example, in sociology and also in psychology, it is more of a loss of being in relation with yourself and the world as not connecting anywhere anymore. But that is more what we find in people who take an indifferent attitude.
Okay.
But what we see in
Nihilism.
yes, exactly, and in a crisis of meaning, there is a suffering. People say, I'm suffering from the fact that my life doesn't have meaning, that I can't find it. And that means there is still the idea that life could be meaningful. And that is very different from an already alienated point of living.
So, what kind of factors do you contribute to this crisis in this age group?
Well, there are probably we can't say we know exactly which what contributes to it, because it is also connected to what's going on globally, what's going on in the situation you are and in the nationality in the state you live in. We see that crisis of meaning come into being when people have a sense of I have an idea what life should be, but reality is so different. There is a huge gap between how it should be and how it is. And there is this sense of, I don't know how to overcome that. I feel helpless in that situation. I am struck by this experience of, well, there is so much meaninglessness. It's so different. It's not true and fair and just and good, this world. It's not meaningful. There is so much suffering. And that is something that has to be worked through. In a way, it is a very normal normal phase, a normal process that everyone goes through when at one point in your life you turn from, Heidegger described it as, for your youth you have to try to get ahead with where you've been thrown. You are thrown into this existence. You end up somewhere, for example, somewhere in Bergen. There you are. You grow up. You become a person who can think, and you try to fit in with your friends, with the relatives, to do things how one does them. But at some point, there often is, or you could say it's good for each of us if there is a situation where we wonder, okay, but if I look at what I see around here, if I don't just do what I think that should be done, but if I try to understand myself and the world and to question it, then we lose what psychology calls positive illusions. When we grow up, we learn some certain assumptions. For example, the world is good, it's fair, everything will be fine. I have everything under control. These are good illusions because they help me to be courageous and strong and to do things, but they are illusions. And in the moment when we start looking honestly at the world and ourselves, these illusions dissolve. And that is a painful process. This is what happens during a crisis of meaning. It's not like I thought it was.
Yeah.
And it's like people describe it as, and I know it myself, the ground is pulled away beneath your feet. Suddenly you don't know what you're standing on anymore. And that happens either, back to your question, what contributes to crisis of meaning? It happens either when something in your personal life disrupts the continuity of I can just go on, or quite often when you are in a situation of passage. For example, you have finished school or studies and you wonder, what should I do now? Because in our situation, in our countries, there are so many possibilities. People often end up in a multi-option paralysis, because there are so many options. They rather don't decide for any of that. So that's can instigate a crisis of meaning. Or nowadays we also see as another trigger of crisis of meaning the major crisis of meaning, like climate crisis, like war. Also these global changes make young people think critically of this world, and often also themselves.
Interesting. I'm reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And do you think that this society today, especially in the Western world, where you are always seeking the kind of next dopamine hit or a message on your phone, the next meal, a drink, whatever, do you think that contributes to people not finding meaning in just the everyday moment of being?
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should ask first, what is it to be in the moment, and what is meaning? To be in the moment is something we apparently have lost and have to learn again. So there are many people who benefit a lot from mindfulness and from this idea, get rid of all those distractions and be in the moment. So that is something that is extremely important, to be able to be in the moment. And what we see is that people either are busy working and identifying with work, and then they are stressed out and they distract themselves with other things.
Yeah.
So there's always input, and you're always in the kind of treadmill, which keeps you from stopping and reflecting. So it is important to have this experience of being in the moment without any input, but that does not necessarily create meaning. From that, the question is, okay, if I found myself some space and made myself free of all those ideas, I have to be like that, I need that, and so on, then the question is, so what? How should life, how should this society, how do I want to be as a person? So those are the meaning questions then that go beyond the moment, and they need reflection and then also putting into action.
Yeah. What kind of role do you think hope plays?
It depends how you define it.
Yeah.
How would you define hope?
I guess it's something that you want to be different in the future.
Yeah, yeah, it's good that you say you want it to be different. Sometimes hope is mixed up with optimism, and it's good not to see these both as a synonym. I like a definition of hope that the Polish activist, I don't know how to pronounce his name, like Walensa or
Like
so.
Valesa.
Yes,
Yeah.
he said, hope is if you do what you think is meaningful, irrespective of what you think will come out. So the focus is not in the hope that, okay, it will be like that, but the focus is on, doesn't matter what happens. Now I'm doing what I hope will lead to how it should be. So this kind of hope is a realistic hope. And that, I think, is very important, in the sense of it's not very relieving to have that hope. It's not as easy as to say, oh, I hope it will be fine.
Mm.
But it's a hope that takes me into responsibility.
Yeah. There's an American neuroscientist and author, Sam Harris. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah, I have.
He has a quote, it's probably not his, but he says that hope is just fear in disguise.
Mm-hmm.
That you're hoping for
Mm-hmm.
something to be better
Mm-hmm.
and not being able to stay in the present.
I could imagine that that in the sense of, I hope it will be better, but if I hope it, I don't have to do anything now,
Yeah.
because I hope it will be better. So the hope already anticipates that it will be okay, and in that sense takes me out of responsibility.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What kind of role does suffering and hardship play in finding meaning?
We see often that suffering and hardship are not very visible in countries like Norway, Germany, Austria, or in all these places where I lived. it's something that we try to hide from others. When we're not feeling well, we try often to put up a nice smile anyway, or yeah, that's something we deal with it on our own. That also means that most people, when they feel bad, have this sense, oh, it's only me because the others, they are all okay. And social media, they show they're all perfect.
Yeah.
They're beautiful. They're in great places and everything is fine. So that is a bit problematic. It is quite problematic because it gives me that idea that something is wrong with me if I feel bad.
Yeah.
But if we look at all these different facets of feeling bad, each of them have their place in life. And also then stop me if I'm talking too much,
Oh, go
but
right ahead.
there are so many incidents of that. For example, one that I find quite instructive is there is a really bad genetic disease, SIPA, where you can't feel pain. And you might say, wow, paradise, I want that. But people who have that disease, they injure themselves all the time, and they have a very high mortality rate because they don't notice when they hurt themselves. And when we hurt, this is a signal, oh, something just happened. I should take attention, take care of that. So that shows so clearly how relevant this pain is for us. It helps us to live. That is one thing. Then negative emotions, when we have them, they have a reason to be there. For example, if I'm angry, that tells me something is going away. It should not. When I'm feeling sad, I'm sad about something that I care for. It shows that I care for something. When I'm ashamed, it tells me, oh, apparently I did something that someone else didn't like. It's a very socially important feeling. So all these negative feelings, they also have a meaning. And if we have this idea, oh, we should be happy, and this doesn't have a place in our lives, then we don't pay enough attention to it. We don't give it the space it deserves. And then finally, that doesn't help anyway psychologically, because if we try to ignore all these things, they don't disappear, but they still,
Exactly. Build up over time, and
they build
maybe
up.
they explode one day.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess this, what you're saying, I'm thinking about how important it is to know yourself, to really know yourself, and how that's difficult when you're always distracted by something, and maybe people distract themselves, like you said, to not having to think about their own thinking.
Yeah.
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 What about death and the awareness that you're going to die? How does that affect meaning?
It's similar with suffering and death, that we exclude it from our everyday life. But it's strange, and there's an analysis that Heidegger made 100 years ago, but it's still so valid. He said, there is death all around us when we watch the news, when we read novels, what do you call them, crime novels,
Yeah.
and so on. So there's death all around. So we could say, oh, of course we deal with death, because we always read about it, watch movies, and so on. But he says all that talking, all that hustle bustle about death, just keeps it more away from us realizing it's actually me who is going to die. And what he described is what I said before, that when we are growing up, we mainly try to get along with the others and to adapt to our environment. This means Heidegger described it as living as one should live. He called it the Mann, for those many Norwegians know some German, as one lives. So one lives as one lives. So that's what one has to do. So and you also can know that one dies. You say that. You say, of course I know one dies, but the moment you switch to I die, even when exchanging the sentences, I sometimes do that with students, something happens. They swallow. Suddenly it's a different experience of saying the sentence, and that realization is something that, if it is real, the realization, then something changes. And that is what we see when people have critical life events, like when I have a bad disease or when a close one dies, they usually have that experience that their life is interrupted, and it gives them some space to reconsider. That means also my life is finite, and do I really want to go on the way I'm doing? And that is an opportunity, actually. And there are quite many people who say things like, because of the disease, for example, I had a justification to stop in all that what was going on. I had to take care of the kids, my job, the money, my health, the holidays. Everything just demands we're going on and on. So you can't stop and think about what should life be, because that needs so much attention. I like to connect that to the picture of when you're out on the sea with a boat and you notice the boat is not tight anymore, and can you repair it in the middle of the sea while you're rowing and there is a wind and so on? No, you have to go back to the coastline, to the shore. And that is similar to what people say. In such a situation, when, for example, when I was allowed not to go to work, when nobody expected of me to continue, then I had the chance to reconsider my life, because suddenly I realized my life is not never ending. And that brought death in it, but it didn't make it darker and heavier. And that is what nearly everyone says when they invite death into their lives. And you see it also in people who work in hospices. They are the most cheerful people I know.
Yeah.
I've been working there at some point too. So this not having to avoid death all the time, but inviting it into life, makes life lighter and easier against our expectations, because it is something we can accept, and it helps us prioritize certain things in life more than we did when we still lived as if life will go on forever.
Yeah. Talking about all this, what do you think of what do you think should be introduced in the educational system at an early age to combat some of these problems?
Well, we're often wondering with colleagues, when do people start having a sense of meaning in life? And I'm quite sure also from working with children, it doesn't start so early. You need a certain abstract thinking to have that idea of meaning in life and existential questions. But children have a very direct, still rather direct approach towards many of these questions. Children talk about death in a very easy matter way, no?
Yeah.
So that is something that we can take up and react to in a way that that the children notice it is okay to talk about it. But that then also stops. And now you're asking me more about education, and there, what I think is most important is to tackle these questions in a very normal way. To talk about, so why are we doing what we are doing? What are we going to do with life? What are actually our priorities? And where do you feel you belong? Where do you want to go? And why do you do what you do? And it's not being afraid of big questions, but taking them down into everyday life. That is the big challenge. And that means in small things you do, get into a discourse in a little chat about, so why are you doing what you're doing right now? It's what phenomenology does. So asking for the why, and what do you experience right now, and could it be different, and what does the other person experience? So it's getting those big questions into everyday life. If we start that from the beginning, it will be easier as adults to deal with them and face them.
Yeah. Do you think things like mindful meditation should be introduced in school?
I'm not so sure about that. We have a lot of studies that show how good and helpful it is for all kinds of situations with mental health and so on. But we only start learning more about the problems of meditation, and it's not something that everyone should do, full stop. But there are also studies that show it's not so much about it having to be an specific ritual of mindful meditation, but just taking an amount of time every day to sit on a chair, on a comfortable chair, and not have any input, but just to let your mind flow, your thoughts flow, has quite similar effects.
Yeah.
So that is something that I think everyone should learn also in school, to deal with silence and to learn to enjoy silence.
Yeah.
And that can be aided by meditation, maybe, but it could also take other ways of
Yeah.
doing it.
Just going for a walk in the woods, for example.
Also, yes.
What about religion? What role does religion play?
In meaning?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is also a big question. For many people, religion is the obvious answer to the question of meaning. But then that is also, is it about the meaning of life or meaning in life? And that's something we haven't talked about yet. But it's important to distinguish both concepts. And in my research, I'm not researching meaning of life, because if that exists, then it's something that is there for the whole world. And yes, I have no access to that empirically. So I don't research it. What I'm researching is meaning in life. And of course, there are people who say, I believe there's a meaning of life. So there's the meaning of life in it. And I say, I believe because I believe in God, and that is God has a divine plan for us.
Yeah.
That is a very strong meaning maker, because this religion can give you orientation, coherence, belonging, and significance. If you are made by God, or you are made similar to God, then you are important, you are significant. So yes, it is a relevant and good source of meaning, but it doesn't mean that you can't find meaning without religion. And it seems to be more difficult to find meaning secularly without that belief in a transcendence. But if you have a broad involvement in life that also transcends yourself and your next door in group, but takes into account the bigger whole, then meaning can also be found secularly.
Yeah. What about the role of work and relationships? Same question.
Yeah, two very big questions. Let's start with relationships. Relationships, they are something like psychology knows three basic psychological needs. DC and Ryan's theory, self-determination theory. They say for human beings to be mentally healthy, they need to have the sense that they can live their life autonomously, that they have a sense of competence, and that they are socially related. And because we are social beings, that is necessary for us. If we feel we are excluded, that does a lot with our sense of self and self-esteem, and it even has consequences physiologically if we feel excluded. But exclusion is not the same as not being with many people. So there are different ways of that. I can feel lonely, but I can be alone without feeling lonely, or I can have many social contexts. And it's important for mental health not to feel lonely, but to be in some way connected. And that is something that is relevant for all age groups. And it's not only connected to meaning, but even to mental health. But as a source of meaning, that is one of the big ones.
Yeah.
And work, yeah, work can fulfill many different sources of meaning, many different needs of meaning. And we see in industrialized countries, since we turned towards more alienated ways of working, when we used more and more machines, and what we did and what we produced was more and more dissociated. The work life became so prominent in our lives. It took so much time away, And Norway is really good in setting boundaries here compared to other European countries. I can compare that with Germany and Austria, saying colleagues go home at 4, which is amazing. Yes, so it can be done, and you know the value of being outdoors in
Yeah.
nature and so on. But we still have, in industrialized countries, we still have a strong identification with the work, which means that we also expect a lot of it. And in the last years, we saw people increasingly asking for meaning in work. And that is a good movement because beforehand, there were all kinds of jobs where people did something and then there it was about the profit that came out of it, and the people who did the work did not really see why they were doing what they're doing, but it was mainly about creating profit. And now when workers and employees ask more and more, what is the meaning of what I'm doing, then also organizations, companies have to ask themselves again, why am I doing what I'm doing? We often think of the profit, but why am I producing this thing? Is it a thing that is valuable? Am I still caring for its quality? Or am I just trying to get it out as cheap as possible? This service I'm offering, why am I offering it? Am I artificially creating people's needs for it, or is it really good for the common good? So this need for meaning that more and more people claim at work can help us be more aware of what are we actually doing and producing and using resources for. What is that really about, and is it good continuing
Yeah.
doing so?
In relation to that, how often do you think people should ask themselves, why am I doing what I'm doing with my life?
Yeah, that is a good question. It is, I'm not, well, I am doing research on meaning. So people, when they talk to me, they think everyone should think about meaning all the time. What we see is if people live meaningful lives, that is nothing they are so aware of. You don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, how meaningful I feel today.
Yeah.
Do you? So when your life is going well in the sense of meaningfully, you're not aware of it often. It's nothing that is on your mind. It is only when it becomes when something does not work anymore as it should, when something is disrupted, then the questions of meaning come up, and then they are being asked. So asking the question of meaning is often only happening when something is not working anymore. And of course, it would be good to ask a bit earlier than when that happens, because then it indicates there's a critical situation. So I think that is something everyone should ask themselves every now and then. Where am I actually? Am I where I wanted to be in my life? Can I support what I'm doing wholeheartedly, or am I just doing what I think one should do? And also ask such questions and go into conversations with loved ones, with friends, even with neighbors. It gives us a completely different experience of community when we don't talk about the weather, but about what is important and what is meaningful. So that adds a certain depth to our relationships. So in that sense, I would, like to invite everyone to every now and then just raise such questions also in a nice evening and talk about it. It will change the atmosphere and also relationships.
Yeah. How how would you sum up the trends you're seeing now compared to, say, 50 years ago or something like that?
Mm. Well, 50 years ago, and as I talk about our societies now because I think it was quite similar with Norway, Germany. Um, we still had that idea. Oh yes, there are things that are bad. There were always wars, and we had problems with the environment. But we were like we knew where we were going. We had the idea things will get better, and we're working towards it. And there was a rather optimistic attitude in general, and people were more light-hearted. Nowadays, we see it. probably won't be that obvious that it's all going well if we don't really make a change. And that change is quite contrary to what we expected 50 years ago, that everything will always be nicer, easier, more comfortable, faster, more with all the machines and digitalization, everything seemed to become easier. But no, we probably have to do something that doesn't make our lives all so much easier,
Yeah.
but take responsibility. So that is quite a big change.
So, if you were to give some advice to people, how would you sum up that advice?
I'm not such a big advice giver as a scientist. I like to raise questions and I like to share findings from all the studies that we have internationally. But if you want to hear what I could share in that regard is um, we have that if we have that sense that, oh, maybe it won't all go so smoothly and all be always nicer and more comfortable, that is not necessarily bad. If we take an honest look at ourselves and the world, and if we face that crisis, it makes it possible to deal with it in a way that it can also be meaningful and good. So I don't think it is something so. The things I just described, they sound a bit apocalyptic, but that's not what I necessarily think. If we stop wearing the pink glasses and think, oh, technology will solve it, but we say, okay, let's deal with the crisis of this world. What is my contribution? What is our country's contribution? Could we do something? Can we do something in our lives to change that? And what can that be? Then there are also many possible changes that are actually very positive, that help us see more clearly what really counts, and all that development towards more digitalization, more comfort, actually took us more away from ourselves and from our connection to nature. We ended up sticking to mobile phones and screens all the time. That's not a good life. So we have a strange idea of a good life. And if we now have this sense, maybe we have to have a quite strong turn, that could be a turn to something that is even better, even if it's not that comfortable and easy as technology has promised.
Yeah. I always ask the same question at the end to everyone, and that is, what is the meaning of life? Maybe I should ask you, what's the meaning in life then?
Yeah, there are many. That is what our research shows. There's so many ways to find meaning in life. There is not one. But if we summarize all these different ways of finding meaning, we can say finding meaning in life is about knowing yourself well, being critically self-knowledgeable, and then acting upon what you think and feel and believe is worth acting upon, finding what you find is important and relevant, and get involved. And that involvement is ideally rather broad and balanced. It's about myself, but also about the ones around me and about the bigger picture. So to see beyond my immediate situation and context is actually the strongest source of meaning. And we refer to it as generativity, a term coined by Erik Erikson, a psychologist, is when people live in a way that they contribute to making this place a world worth living also for the generations after us. That is the biggest source of meaning. People who live according to that, they usually also say, my life is meaningful. So if that is in your life too, that's a good bet to have a good and meaningful life.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Tusen takk for at du hørte på Bendiksen Airways. Dersom du har tips, kommentarer eller vil gi en vurdering av episoden, så gjør gjerne det. Det setter jeg stor pris på.